Welcome. Just so you're aware, good afternoon and welcome all to today's session. I'm Karisham, Head of Partnerships at WealthiHer Network, and I'm delighted to be moderating today's session. First of all, a huge thank you to Gain and Vicky, who have organised today. I'm particularly excited for this as it's such an important topic and one that we as the WealthiHer Network put a strong focus on. An hour and a half is never enough, but we do hope this discussion is just the start on which we can build. And also just know this isn't personal advice, but general information that we hope that you find useful, and you can of course carry those conversations on. For those of you not familiar with the WealthiHer Network, we aim to transform financial futures for women. We unlock the value of women for themselves and for each other, and do this by arming and equipping and empowering women with the knowledge and connections that they need to prosper. We work collaboratively with our financial, professional, and inspirational charitable partners like Gain. Entrepreneurs, leaders, investors, and women advancing in their careers are united in a desire to understand the world of finance and make the most of it, whether personally or in business, to be the greatest in all they can do, and the reason I'm sure why all of you are here today. Often they feel less sure about themselves when it comes to finances, and when they come face to face with the financial world, they often don't know where to turn to get trusted and expert advice. And there is unrealized financial value creation for these women due to that lack of financial engagement. £700 billion are lost each year by the financial services industry. And a few other interesting numbers just to frame this conversation. We see that the women's pension gap is widening, with it being worth just 60% of a man's, and with £1 million lost every year over a woman's life through lack of investment, it's clear we need to start thinking about how to position ourselves early. Which brings me to today's session, where we will be discussing just why it's so important for young women to invest, and also how you can take your first steps in this journey. So I'm joined today by a stellar panel of experts who will be sharing their wisdom and insights with you today. They all work within the financial services industry with a wealth of experience, and ideally placed to talk to you about why it's so important for you to understand investing and how to get started. So my first panelist is Vivian Abbott, who is a chartered financial advisor at Brewin Dolphin, one of the WealthiHer Network's founding partners. Vivian has been in the financial services industry for 7 years, working within wealth management, specifically private banking. Speaking to Vivienne earlier this week, it's clear that she's passionate about informing young women in making their financial choices. Having left school early, Vivienne's first job was in finance, where she realized at the time she had very little knowledge about anything that was investments related, as it was just something that wasn't a subject growing up at school or within the family. The more she learned, the more interested she became, and when she transitioned into a wealth management company, realized how few clients were actually women. And this is why she wants to try to help and advise as many young women as possible. Joining Vivienne on the panel are Victoria Macdonald and Felicia Hjertman. I've been practicing, Felicia. Victoria is an investment manager, having co-founded a wealth management company, Manabridge Investment Management, 2.5 years ago. She helps individuals make the most of their wealth so they can relax and feel comfortable about their future. Victoria is especially passionate about helping women to develop their money and savings, along with educating to demystify the world of finance. Victoria is keen to encourage more representation so young women might consider wealth management as a career, and also make money management more accessible to everyone rather than just a privileged few. My final guest today is Felicia Hjertman. Felicia is the founder and CEO of Tillit, a new DIY investment platform reimagining the way that people discover and invest in funds. Felicia is originally from Sweden, and an interesting fact, the name of her company Tillit means trust in Swedish. As we know, when thinking about personal wealth and also helping to manage it, it's very emotive, and trust is key. So before setting up Tillit, Felicia spent 8 years as a fund manager and investment analyst at the world-leading asset manager Baillie Gifford. She graduated with a BA Honours in International Business with Finance and Russian Language from European Business School in 2011. So I welcome you all.
Thank you.
Thanks.
As I mentioned earlier, research shows that women lose out on over £1 million in their lifetimes through lack of investing. So with this in mind, I'd like to kick off the discussion by asking the panel why you see that it's important for girls to be fully engaged with their finances and to start investing. So Vivian, if I can start with you, what's your view on this?
So firstly, welcome to everyone. I believe it is so important for women to be aware of their investments and start off at an early age. It brings confidence and independence. The earlier you start, your future self will thank you for it. By being engaged with your finances and aware, you can get into good habits early. For example, starting with budgeting, regular savings, and this will ensure that your results pay off later in life without the added burden of financial worries. It's important to have a think about what you want to achieve, have a goal in mind, and how do you want to get there. By investing early, you're giving your money enough time to generate wealth over a medium term, and then you would have built up a pot for you to use towards whatever goals you have in life.
Fantastic. No, that's very, very good points. Thank you, Vivian. The other thing I wanted to mention to the audience is we do want this to be interactive. So please do feel free to make comments. Any questions that you have along the way, just pop them in the chat box. We'll try and get to them as we go along. And if not, we'll definitely answer your questions at the end. So I love that we have got 3 women talking about investing on this panel today. Vivian, you've explained why it's so important. Also, sometimes the finance industry can appear very male dominated, which clearly we can see more women needed particularly in investments and investment management. The saying, "You can't be what you don't see," is probably never more appropriate. Gain is going a long way to help position women and create these opportunities, which is fantastic in this space. So do you think that one of the reasons why young women are less engaged, what do you think those reasons are, and how do you think that we can change this?
Yeah, definitely. I think the industry does have a reputation of being male dominated, but that is starting to change, which is brilliant. It's not something that's discussed a lot at school, and I left school not having a clue about investments. It's also a very British thing not to speak about money, and people have their reservations about sharing details on their personal finances. So I think it's really important to educate everyone at a younger age. And just like today, being very open and having women in the industry that you can speak to is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. It clearly is about knowing that you can be open about this and start having those money conversations. Felicia, if I can ask you what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I mean, I think it doesn't just appear to be male dominated, it is unfortunately still very much male dominated. And I mean, that saying, as you said, if you can't see it, you can't be it. I kind of think be the change you want to see, because if you're waiting around for someone else to make that change, then not that you'll be waiting forever, but I think it's on all of us to make sure that the next generations of women come into finance and are more engaged with finance, both professionally and personally. But in terms of also, I think there are different reasons for why this industry looks a bit like it does today. And I can only speak for kind of investment management, but there is a preference in the industry to hire people who've studied kind of economics, maths, finance, all of that stuff. And frankly, where I used to work, and I think that's one of the things that they did really, really well, is if you have studied one of this, you're actually less likely to get in because you've been conditioned into efficient markets and all that crap. So in that sense, they kind of have this view around hiring from diverse backgrounds, studying kind of much more social science subjects and so on, because it's much more about the perspective that you bring and the curiosity of your mind. And anybody who's bright can pick up kind of how you calculate a certain thing. And also we have automatic ways of doing that. So you can teach someone those things, whereas you can't teach someone a different way to think. And I think investment management ultimately is about making decisions, and the more perspectives you have covered, the better everyone's off, clients, the industry, and so on. So I think the industry actually should broaden their minds a little bit more.
Those are really good points. I think you're right when speaking about the diversity. I think diversity leads to so many better outcomes and more varied as well. And when you look at a client base that is also equally as diverse, you need it to be relatable. So Victoria, on to you. Love to hear from you now.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with everything that's been said. I think we work in a people business, and especially my job is about helping individuals make the most of their money. And a big part of that is working with someone you trust and feel comfortable with, and that you feel like you can ask those questions to, and that you're not intimidated. So I think I think to have more diversity so women can have an ally and not be intimidated, I think, has to be a positive. Our industry loves making things overly complicated and too much jargon. And so I think sometimes having the female touch, and being approachable can hopefully break down some barriers. And it's a trust thing, I think.
Absolutely. And I think that word time and time again is about trust and making it relatable and understandable. It isn't complicated once you break it down, and it's much more open. And in relation to more girls being investors, do you think what are your thoughts there? And if I ask Felicia first.
As in why it's important, or?
Important, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's two parts, right? One is being a personal investor in your personal life and coming into the industry. And on a personal level, I mean, having a secure long-term financial future is something that concerns us all, regardless of gender, race, background. It's all relative, but everybody needs to make the most of their savings to be able to kind of secure the best future for themselves. So that's why I think it's very important that everyone as individuals consider investing and try to kind of learn about it and feel comfortable about trying it out. And then secondly, I think professionally, in addition to what we said earlier, I think there's that need for broad perspectives and so on, but also, I mean, to be quite frankly, there's been all kinds of studies coming out showing that women in some cases are actually better at investing than men. And what particularly is supported is having diversity of view. So teams that are gender balanced tend to make better risk-adjusted decisions for long-term investors. So actually, you know what, like, we all just need to kind of step up and not just assume just because my dad or my boyfriend, my brother used to do it, they're going to be better at it. It's just complete not true. And there's now more studies kind of supporting that as well. So yeah, I think it's important on all levels, but particularly on a personal level.
And I love the fact that you made that distinction, because you're absolutely right. Being an investor is just as important in your personal life as it is taking it on as a profession. So no, I think that is very definitely important. Anyone else? Victoria?
Yeah, I think it's also empowering to be in control of your finances. And, why should that be reserved for men or when we're older or, getting our plans in place? I think the days are gone where, there was a head of the household that managed the finances. It's so old school. I think, we should all get involved.
Yeah. And I think also as our lives essentially get a little bit more sophisticated with the different avenues we choose, different jobs that we take or portfolio careers, it's managing all of those different components. And actually our research at WealthiHer showed that financial autonomy is very clearly linked to financial confidence. And that in turn is linked to self-esteem. So they're all interconnected, and we still should start to think about it in that way. And I think that, and from sessions like today, from what Gain is doing, what we see in the industry, the fact that we at WealthiHer have such a great member base as well, we see that this is improving. You all are here with us today. It may feel slow, but change is happening. We can see that more young women are learning about money and teaching others that it's within their grasp and that they can take charge of their finances. So we know why it's important. So let's start thinking about how we should get started. So Vivienne, how can someone start to invest? Bearing in mind that most young people may not have huge amounts to invest, but you can start small. So how would you start to think about it, and how would you start to begin to grow that?
Yeah, of course. I mean, for a first-time investor, going into this is quite scary. So firstly, I would make sure you know your budget first and foremost. You know what you have over left each month. You know what you could afford to invest. Making sure that you pay off any expensive debts such as credit cards is also a first, and building up emergency funds should anything happen. So for example, I advise my clients to hold 3 to 6 months worth of essential expenditure just in an easy access account. So when you do start to invest, you don't need to draw upon those investments and pull out perhaps at a bad time in the markets. So any form of savings or financial planning is a plus. And monthly regular contributions will pay off. So you don't need a large sum to start off with. And I would look at investing over a medium time horizon, for example, 5 years plus. Drip feeding what you can afford each month. We'll be investing at different times as well. So for example, by paying once a month into a regular investment, your money buys shares at a cheaper price when the market falls, and also buys fewer shares when the markets rise. So this averages out over the time, and it's called pound cost averaging, and it can help to smooth out market volatility over a longer period.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And I think that all of that is so important, and to start thinking about that in various different components, so almost like buckets, so that you can take it in bite-sized chunks. Because I think it can be, when you're first coming across thinking about how to do it, where do I start? What do I think about? What are the impacts of certain things? So Victoria, if I can ask you, working in the finance industry, we know that it's important to start having these conversations. As Vivian explained, we then can really go into the detail about how we can set these up in the right way. And also, I think importantly first, to really understand, what do you want to achieve? What are your financial and investment goals? And how do you start thinking about those as a first-time investor, or somebody that's not really clear on kind of where they should be?
I think it's really important to remember that goals change over time. So don't ever feel that, you know, I've signed up for 100% growth and that you have to stay that way in the future. I think best advice is just think about what's important to you. What are you working towards for the long term? Is it saving for a property? Is it, you know, financial freedom and a pension? It could be anything. Mm-hmm. But those would be your objectives. And then there's also really useful investment risk questionnaires online, which give you a bit of a judgment about potentially how you feel about risk. You know, do share price movements keep you up all night? And you can find those on, if you just Google attitude to risk questionnaire, there's loads of them online, and they're quite helpful as well, giving you a bit of a steer of where you want to be.
Mm. No, absolutely. And I think that obviously this is a conversation that you start having and you start thinking about, but that will always evolve. Because the situation changes, you will start to kind of change your goals or your attitudes or where you want to be. So I think it's almost like you're building blocks. So starting to think about what you want to achieve, what your goals are. And then, as you mentioned, and actually you lead very well into my next question, around what are the things that you have to think about alongside your goals. So once those goals are set, we need to think about what investments are suitable for somebody and what, given their current situation. And as we said, those will change eventually. And this would also include, for example, their risk profile. So do you mind spending a little bit of time to help someone to understand how do you identify what your suitability is, and also what someone's risk profile is and what that means essentially? Because if it's somebody that's new to investing, they may not understand how do we measure risk? What does it mean? So Vivian, if I start with you, and then I'd love to hear from all of you around that question.
Yeah, absolutely. So to identify your suitability, it's based on your circumstances and also your affordability to invest as well. You know, you would look at facts such as your income, expenditure, assets, liabilities, any dependents, for example, but then also your objectives and how to get there. This is sort of the building blocks of forming a solution. And everyone will have a different risk profile. There is no right or wrong, and it's your appetite to risk. And that's what Victoria was saying. You know, there's different companies out there with different ways of measuring risk, but essentially your risk appetite takes into account your tolerance. So how much risk you feel comfortable taking. For example, how would you feel if your investments fell 20% in a month? How does that make you feel? And also with regards to your capacity. So if you were investing every last bit of cash that you had, you wouldn't want to take a high level of risk because you don't have the capacity to do so. Another factor to also consider is time horizon. If you are investing, for example, for retirement, you've got such a long time horizon and you could potentially afford to take a slightly higher risk. So there's a few different areas to sort of say your risk profile. It's not something that's just set in stone. And of course, it will also change throughout your life as well.
But it's a good way to start thinking about it. As with everything, I think it can be quite daunting, but to start thinking about those various elements that you talk about that can help you to build this profile of yourself and where you are. So Victoria, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think it's probably fairly across the industry, but we look at risk very, very similar to Vivian. You know, how much can you afford to risk based on, you know, what you've got to fall back on. how you feel about it. Does it keep you up at night? And also how much risk you have to take. If I want to double my money in 6 years for that house in Islington, you know, how much do I need to risk to get that? I mean, that's a crazy example, but you see what I mean.
No, absolutely. And Felicia, I would like to come to you and ask you about that question, but I'm actually also going to throw in another point there as well, just because I'm going to do it, and I know you'd love to you'd love me to do that. So we talk about the risk profile, and as Victoria, you know, it tends to be standard across the industry about what you look out for with risk. But I think also to put into that, when you are a first-time investor, you're thinking about what your risk profile is, but then it is also important to think about, you know, along with that risk profile and your capacity to take risk, but also keeping something aside to mitigate any risk, and to make sure that you have got, like you said, if you want to buy that house, not only are you saving for that and you've got your risk associated with that, but you're putting something aside as well to make sure that you've got your little rainy day fund, because that's something that I want to make sure that when you're investing, you're looking at your capacity, but then you're also looking at having an extra liquid pot, something by the side of you as well, to just help you along the way if anything should happen that you're not expecting.
Yes, I mean, so if I can just take a step back though, because I think the whole industry does a really terrible job at explaining what risk is, and I know, like Vivian and Victoria, you've done a really good job compared to what, you know, the overall industry is, but I think still we're all faced with this like medium risk, high risk, low risk. What does that mean? And even the portfolios that support those different risk buckets are different on different platforms, because everybody has their own view around what is high risk and what is low risk and medium risk. And I think the other thing is, just as human beings, we're taught from an early age that risk is bad. And yet we take risks in our lives every day. All of us do. Some of them calculated, some of them subconscious. I mean, when was the last time you thought about you might lose your life if you get into an Uber? Probably not very often. Equally, you ride a bike, you wear your helmet, you know the rules, but there's no assurance that you're not going to end up in an accident when you ride your bike on the street or in traffic. And I think those risks are things that we just think of that's part of life, and we make those decisions every day. Investing is very similar, but I think the whole industry is framed in the sense of you might lose all your money. And yes, there is the probability of doing that, but just like learning how to ride a bike, there's certain basic rules that if you follow those, that markedly reduces the probability of you actually losing all your money. And so I think in that sense, And so I think in that sense, it's important to learn the basics of that. And that comes down to time horizon, it comes down to diversification in particular, I think. And if you follow some very few basic steps, the risk of you losing all your money is actually quite low in that sense, from my point of view. And I just think that if you take the example, if you put all of your money into one stock, one company, then yes, that risk of that loss is much, much bigger, because everything is tied to the success of that company. Whereas if you put that across 10 different companies or in a fund, and most funds have at least 60 holdings in them, that means for you to lose all of your money, not only does one of those companies need to go bust, or something needs to go so terribly wrong that the share price drops by 100% straight away, but not only does that need to happen to one company, it needs to happen to all 60 companies, and needs to happen at the same time so that the manager doesn't have the time to move. So if you think these things through a bit and add up all of those probabilities, actually the chance of losing all of your money, if you leave it in for a long time and you have time to ride out that volatility, is actually much lower than what it can seem like when you see capital at risk, you might lose everything. And I think we're sometimes disadvantaging people, and instead of educating them, we're worrying them and we're scaring them. And I don't like that. So we talked about empowering and kind of confidence and so on. We're really huge on that, and content, and we have jargon. And so I think it's just, sorry, I went on a bit of a ramble there and probably didn't answer your question, but that's kind of, it's a bugbear for me, because I think the industry should do better at getting people comfortable with risk.
And I think it's really important. And I think another thing that you just mentioned, sorry, Victoria, you were going to say something?
No, just wholeheartedly agreeing.
And I agree with you, and I think that you're right, that it is a subject that people don't fully understand, and I think and it's coming back to starting those conversations early, like you said, you know, it's diversification, but understanding diversification, time horizon, start thinking about things early, and then, you know, this is not a race, you can start to build it up slowly. And actually, it brought me back to you and I and the conversation that all three of us had yesterday. So we were talking about longer term investing versus a short term trading, and we wanted to just touch on it slightly. So Felicia, when we spoke, you mentioned compounding, number one, which is very important to an investor. So building this thing up to make the most of your money. We look at investing with a view to longer term, not only to maximize investment, secure your future, so to help risk. Talk about very briefly the risks associated for short-term trading that might seem, like you say, a higher return opportunity, similar to a single stock and not diversifying your assets, just so that people they understand the risks associated with that.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, I think it's because we have so many different microphones, it's hard to, there's a bit of an echo and I don't have headphones, sorry about that. I think I come from a background where investing is a long-term thing. It's based on fundamentals. It's based on making a few good decisions for the long term. And you kind of, from a personal aspect, I think, you leave it be and you get on with your life. With short-term trading, I think it's quite different in many aspects. And my personal view here is it's much more based on, instead of diversification, it's based on usually a single stock that you're making a bet in, or a single asset in that sense. And so the opposite of diversification there is also based on the short term. It's based on you're trying to find a particular trigger, and sometimes it comes down to short-term news, hype in the market, emotion. It's not based around the fundamentals of a company necessarily, and quite frankly usually not. And it's much harder to predict the future, what's going to happen with something's share price in the next day or week or month. Whereas thinking about long-term themes, how likely is technology to play a bigger part in our lives in 10 years' time? Probably pretty high. What is Apple's share price going to do next week? I don't have a clue. Not even professional investors have a clue. And if they do, they either have insider information or they just have a sense of hubris and think that they can just know the future. And so I think with trading, short-term trading, it's really easy to get sucked in because it's exciting. It almost is a bit more like gambling. And therefore, the kind of risks that you're taking are very different. And I think to do that well, you can make money that way. I would never know how to make money that way. But if you do know how to make money that way, then yes, consider it. But I think one other thing to bear in mind with that when it comes to short-term trading is, because of the mechanics of it, there's always going to be someone who's smarter and quicker than you and who's going to make money on the fact that they can see you coming. And so I think it's just, I'm not saying, you have to find what's right for you, but it's a very different thing to do short-term trading in individual things compared to long-term investing. And maybe you size the money that you put towards one versus the other accordingly. I don't know. But that's kind of just different risks to think about. And I certainly wouldn't be able to give advice on how to do short-term trading, that's for sure. So.
And, I think it is all about getting yourself informed. And I think talking about these things just help to identify the differences and understand what's associated with that to get going on this journey. And also, there are a lot of things that we cover. We talk about time horizon, we talk about risk, we talk about diversification. And so automatically when people think about investing, especially if you're a young investor or starting out, your first thought is a large, sophisticated trading house, for example, which could be quite intimidating for anybody. Is this the only way? We know it isn't, but this isn't the only way to invest. What other ways are there to start thinking about how you can, approach investing? Felicia?
Yeah, I think today, because of technology, there's so many different options out there, and sometimes a bit overwhelmingly many, to be honest. I mean, there's everything from robo-advisors, where you fill out these different risk questionnaires and so on, and then they invest that for you based on your profile, down to these roundup apps that then, you round up buy a coffee, round it up a bit, and then they invest that in the markets. Or you have the DIY platforms, such as what we're building, where you have more control. You go in and you make the decisions yourself. Or indeed, you can go to a personal advisor in that sense. So there's all kinds of things that you can do. And I think exploring what they are, they come with different pros and cons, but maybe it comes back to what Vivian said earlier, and we don't really talk about money and investing, and I think investing in particular, and in Sweden, culture is quite different in that sense. We talk very openly about everything, and in fact, you can find out anyone's salary in the country if you have their date of birth. And so it's one of those things where money is more spoken about. And I think if you remove the taboo from it, you can actually learn from each other and not feel afraid of asking stupid questions. I mean, nobody knows everything. I don't know anywhere near everything, and I've worked in the industry for 8 years. So it's one of those, I think talking about it helps, and asking what other people do, and then trialing a few ones out within your means, as Vivian and Victoria talked about earlier as well.
Yeah, and I think that's a huge point about people don't talk about money. And actually a lot of the things that we've done in terms of the studies, and then also some of the sessions that we've run around how to feel comfortable talking about money with your spouse, with your parents, with your children, just to get that conversation going so it becomes comfortable. And then you can question, you can have those dialogues, and then you can take it forward. So I think you're absolutely right that it's very much linked. And also our approach to money is actually behavioral from what we see around us happening, how we've grown up, and the experiences that we've seen there. So I think it's interesting about the various ways that we see this huge evolution with not only people but platforms. So Vivian, you're working in a wealth management firm. It's a valuable option for someone who wants to work with an advisor to position their overall wealth in the right way. As we mentioned before, this can be daunting for someone just starting out and thinking about investing. Where do you advise people like those in our audience to take their first steps to research and hopefully
absolutely a lot? And so regards to research, there's plenty of websites out there, and it's all sort of so much out there to do your own research. For example, there's the Money Advice Service, and you would have seen on the TV Money Saving Expert. You've got a lot of information out there, and depending if you do read newspapers, there'll also be a financial section in there as well. So by making sure you do your own research and you feel comfortable, you can then ask the right questions as well. Companies now want to engage clients from an earlier stage. So from my side, from Brew and Dolphin side, we can take on clients with as little as £500 lump sum and £25 per month. So it's all about accumulating your growth now to get into a position where you may want to speak to an advisor in the future. Yeah. And that would be the same for many providers as well.
And I think that's important. When I was young, I didn't really think that you could talk to an advisor. I didn't think about ISAs or anything like that. And I come from a career in wealth management, but it was a very late on that I actually started thinking about my own personal financing and to Felicia's point, building that up over the years. After your 10 years of first getting into the industry, or whatever industry you're in, it can be a significant amount that you can put forward to your house in Islington, Victoria. So yeah,
one day.
I wanted to also ask the audience now if they have any questions, any thoughts. Please feel free to share. We'd love to hear your thoughts as well about anything around any of these topics. We really want to be able to give you a great overview and sight of what to think about. Obviously, those conversations can be carried forward, but please do feel free to share. I would like to change tack slightly, if I may. WealthiHer research has shown that younger women have strong environmental and social values and only want to engage now as a consumer with companies that align with those values. This now is also impacting their investment choices, and we see more women across the spectrum of age wanting to invest more responsibly. It's not just somebody else's responsibility anymore, it is their own. So Victoria, once we start investing, how can we make investments that align with those values, or try and make those choices and have that accessibility?
Yeah, it's interesting actually, as a shareholder of an individual company, you actually get voting rights on what the company is doing. A couple of weeks ago, there was a shareholder revolt on executive pay at Hochschild Mining. There was a really sad death in Peru. But despite this, the executive annual bonus is linked to health and safety. And they were due to get 100% bonus, which obviously shareholders thought, you know, should be cut to zero. So you can have influence in that way. And sort of 10 years ago, I think there was a mindset that by investing with, you know, ethical or ESG values, environmental, social, or governance, used to mean sacrificing performance, and that's just not the case now. There isn't just demand from clients in this area, there's also increased supply. There's a broad range of products you can invest in, and funds and pre-made portfolios for you, whether it be environmental with renewable energy, or, you know, social with positive impact funds. I think investing mindsets have changed, and there's so many options in that area.
And I think now what you're seeing is because there is so much interest in this space, and I think previously people would talk about ESG, for example, but not really understand or know. But what I see a lot of organizations doing now, and what we're also trying to do, is to really break that down. So what is responsible investing? What is investing with impact? And how do we think about ESG? And I think that's really important, because it allows everyone to be able to, you know, to really know how they can do it, whatever end of the spectrum that they're at, and what it all means. And it's good to see that. So so we see that investors are evolving in their choice of investments. So too do we see the landscape on how to invest evolve. Felicia, you touched on it earlier on, and I know that you have launched a new investment platform. As you also said, Sweden has a very strong, well, it has an open conversation around money, which is phenomenal, but it also has a strong background in developing and using fintech for everyday financial transactions. So how has fintech changed the way that women invest and made it more accessible for first-time investors?
Yeah, I mean, I'm slightly biased because, you know, we're running a fintech, but I think fintech, I mean, generally, what is it? Fintech is a combination of finance and technology, right? And you might hear of insurtech and all of that, but it's just, the whole point of it is, I guess, making the most of technology and bringing people access and information, you know, to your fingertips on your phone. Which I think has been revolutionizing a lot of industries for a long, long time, but perhaps it's accelerating in particular industries right now. And yeah, I mean, as a Swedish person, I'm very proud of the things that have come out of Sweden, but frankly, the UK is, I think, you know, even more of a leader in fintech. And I'm sure many of the people listening in are familiar with Revolut or Monzo or Klarna, which happens to be Swedish actually, Wise, but you know, there's all kinds of different companies who are trying to make things better, cheaper, easier to use. And I think that's great, because ultimately it means that for all of us, and you know, for consumers, it means more competition and better services, essentially. So I don't even think it's just for women. In fact, I can't even think of anything that's for specifically women. And I have a bit of a bugbear about separating out women in investing, like almost like this like patronizing angle of it. So I think it's just generally good for all people in terms of how tech is coming in. But then I guess the pros and cons of platforms versus a more human relationship, in that sense of speaking to an IFA or so on. With platforms, typically cost tends to be lower. That's not necessarily the case, because I think, as Vivian said, costs are actually quite flexible in different, it's not just, people have an assumption that nobody can afford to go to an IFA. That's not true. And also I think everybody should be upfront with their costs, both platforms and IFAs. And that's also something that doesn't quite happen. But I think generally platforms tend to be cheaper. You also can have a bit more choice sometimes, as in more control over that. Because we believe at Tillit that, you know, long-term financial future is something that everybody should be engaged in. We have chosen to build a DIY platform because we want to empower people with information, with knowledge, with confidence, so that they can make more decisions on their own with conviction and do so comfortably. And so that's why, you know, there is more decision on your behalf. Whereas if you go and speak to an IFA, you know, you have more of a personal touch, you get more of a bespoke solution, and you get more personal advice, unless platform you're looking at also offers that. But so I think there's pros and cons. So you just need to figure out what's right for you and at that time in your life, what is it you're looking to get out of it, and is it worth it, or are you prepared to take the control yourself? And you know, the answer might be different depending on what you're looking to achieve.
Absolutely. And interestingly enough, we were looking at different generations and the younger generation actually, and your point about IFA versus a robo-advisor, for example, there is still a very defined need to have that human touch and that personal contact. And actually that seemed to be more prevalent in the origination of that relationship, the start, the trust build, to have somebody on hand to have those conversations with. And again, to your point, later on down the line, when you get to the execution and when you get to the transactional stage, that's actually when those fintech or that accessibility, the efficiency comes into play. And as you said as well, it's having that access. It's able to transfer money from here to a friend of mine that's in Switzerland or that's in India or that's somebody somewhere else. Being able to do that with the lives that we lead now, definitely more efficient. But you're absolutely right. Depending on the circumstance, there is a very real need for both still, even in the world that we're living in now. I don't know, Victoria or Vivian, if you've got anything else to add to that.
No, I completely agree with everything that you were just saying. I think it does depend on the stage of your life and also what you want, really. I know a lot of my clients really value that face-to-face sort of relationship, but given everything that's happened with COVID and everyone in lockdown, we've had to adapt and do Zoom meetings and Microsoft Teams meetings. So it's almost going that way, but still having someone on the other end of the phone that you can speak to and has got that emotional side and understands your goals in that sense. Some of my clients, all my clients really value that.
And I think actually just touching on Best Invest, where you cover with Bruin, it's great because a lot of organizations now as advisors are able to to speak to people that are just starting out. You don't have to have a lot of money. You can just start to have those conversations about, where do I go from here, how do I start and get going. So I think it's good that we're aware of those options that are available. So we talked about fintech, we talked about the different types of investment, and I think that given the last years, we should also touch on an investment that many know about and are hearing a huge amount about, but may not necessarily fully understand what it is. So cryptocurrency. Bitcoin in particular, especially as El Salvador has now made it legal tender. So cryptocurrency, I can't even say cryptocurrency. What do you think about them being a good investment opportunity, and I think importantly, so what do you think are things that you need to think about and watch out for? Victoria, I'd love to ask you this question.
I think there's a real disparity between individuals' risk tolerances that we were talking about and cryptocurrency. I think because everybody is talking about it and the fear of missing out, sometimes that extreme volatility and the extreme movements can be really scary, and I think sometimes individuals aren't quite prepared for that. The key thing to remember about crypto is that it is not regulated at all. The FCA, who's our regulator, has a warning that you can lose all of your money. I think it seems more accessible because you download it on an app, but as Vivian's already discussed earlier, you can do that with a diversified investment portfolio too. It's the classic, not having all your eggs in one basket. If all of your money is in one asset, be it crypto or anything else, you're really increasing your level of risk. So I'd say standard risk advice: make sure you've paid up for your debts, make sure you have your rainy day money before you think about investing. And then just personal opinion, for what it's worth, I think the technology is absolutely revolutionary and probably is the future, but I just have to sort of feel like it will be the biggest banks and the governments that will release cryptocurrency, which will be regulated, rather than being able, which will be regulated, and so you can use it day to day. At the moment it's so volatile, you couldn't really use it as legal tender. I fail to believe Bitcoin's a finished product. I think there's a lot more to come in that area.
Very good. Thank you for that. I think that's really interesting. I think it's very good points as well. So I think it's clear that the overarching theme is getting informed, research, trying to understand and taking your time. Like we said, this isn't a race. This is really about taking it one step at a time, starting to have those money conversations, I think are key. Whether it be with a friend, whether it be with networks like these. I think networks like these, and actually I'm going to throw another question in there just because I can, to all of you, because I think this is something that I really want us to focus in on, is these networks that you have available. You know, who do you talk to about money, each one of you, and what networks have you found really valuable that you could reach out to start having these conversations, and that all of our listeners can really think about and start to have those conversations? Vivian.
Yeah, so joining the industry, I literally didn't know anyone. I was completely on my own with investments, but that made you want to do your own research and made you seek other women in the industry. And I think by connecting, and especially lockdown has proven that we can join different groups now. So I have got several groups I'm a part of. Quite a lot of them are, you know, women in investments, women in business as well, and making sure that you can connect to similar people. And I guess when you're a student as well, you don't really feel like you have that connection. But obviously we've got us, so if you ever wanted to chat to us, that's obviously the first start. And as you start investing and you start talking to other people, that connection and that network gradually grows over time as well.
Yeah, I think that's key, isn't it? It's just starting to build. Everyone you speak to might have a different opinion, and then to Felicia's point earlier on, it's that diversification of thought, not just only but also with your network, with different ideas. Victoria.
Yeah, I think you know, groups like Gain and WealthiHer are absolutely fantastic for educating, and you know, the social media platforms that they have, and as Felicia said earlier, you know, talking to people, talking to friends, everyone, you know, most people you know have probably got a pension. Where is it? What's it doing? You know, and yeah, talking, it's knowing who to talk to. And LinkedIn's a great source. You know, if you type in investment managers, wealth managers, lots of people come up. You can always, you know, try and contact individuals. I think everybody's more often than not willing to help and talk. And yeah,
I think that's true. And you know, when I first started out, I remember getting very nervous about reaching out to different groups, and you know, would I know what to say? Would I say the right thing? And actually, when you get to these groups and you start talking to women and men actually in these groups, you will actually find that everybody's got a question. And everybody's asking the same ones, and you know, if somebody actually reaches out and asks that question, you're like, why didn't I ask that question? Because I was thinking the same thing. So I think you're absolutely right, that just taking that step and trying to do that. Felicia, I don't know if you have anything to add to kind of networks or groups that you found valuable.
I mean, I think also because I used to be in the industry as an investment manager, and still in fintech in that sense. A lot of my friends are also in that network, and there is an implicit interest in what we do. So I know that my personal interest is probably different to the average person in that sense. So we talk about that stuff. But then equally, I had 2 different groups reach out to me over the last few weeks. One was a group of, so I know this person who reached out through kind of work related things. And he said he's gotten a group of his friends together and they want to start learning about investing, and they're in their early 40s. And they're like, would you mind coming to talk to us about it? I'm like, I'd love to. And so we did a bit like this, basically, where kind of a more of a Q&A in that sense, and me trying to figure out getting a sense of the level of interest and knowledge in the room, but then also to see, well, how do you get the most out of this session? And they had different speakers every week. So they met every week, and they had an IFA one week, they had me one week, they had someone else another week. And since then, another group completely unrelated, a young professional woman, she's like, well, I've gathered a group of professional women. We don't know each other super well as friends, but we all want to learn more about investing. And so again, would you be happy to come and talk to us? So I think I would really encourage that. It comes back to speak to your friends, colleagues, family members, whoever. And if there's any interest at all, you know, get a bit of a reading group, like a book club essentially, and decide how often you meet, decide on a topic. And then if you want to reach out to someone who's an expert or someone who works in the industry on that topic, do. I mean, I think I speak for hopefully a lot of people in the industry, that if someone reaches out to me and wants to learn more about it, I'll always make time for that, and I think other people will as well. It doesn't take that much of our time to do so. So yeah, I'd say, yeah, speak to people, basically. Sorry, that's a long rant of essentially saying speak to people.
No, but do you know what? I think that's it. Just these small things. You know, so a friend of yours asked, and now you've got this kind of money club that you talk openly about and get those questions answered. I think it's practical advice like that we need to speak more about. I think that's what's going to make the difference. So ladies, thank you. You've shared so much, and it's absolutely great. We've actually got a few questions. And what I want to end, and actually what I'm going to say to the audience as well, is for anyone brave enough, we're going to look at these questions now as well. If there's any comments that you'd like to make or any statements of intent, because what I will do after we've answered your questions is also ask our wonderful panel to give us their 3 top tips or steps that they would recommend taking. So get your thinking caps on, and please do share with us as well. And in the meantime, a couple of questions from the audience. So the first one from Teniola: how did you all get started on your personal investing journeys? Let me ask, Vivian, I start with you.
Yeah, of course. So I started quite late, I would say, just because I didn't really have a clue about investing when I joined the industry. The first thing I will say is, when you go into an employment, or if you move jobs, you're going to more than likely to have a pension. So I think first step is obviously taking control of your pension and having a look at where it's invested and, you know, managing that side. But in regards to personal investing, it's just making sure you've got the regular amounts, and when you can start affording to make those regular amounts, and start, you know, as soon as possible, because it will pay off and you don't want to leave it too late.
So we'll come to you with anything to do with pensions, as you're very welcome. And that's it. I think with the pension, it's one of those you don't really think about unless you have to. And so you think, so when you're already in a job, you think it will take care of yourself, and you don't really know what it's invested into, what it's comprised of. And then also when you're not in regular employment, which a lot of people aren't now, because it's much more kind of your portfolio of careers, or you're self-employed, then it's thinking about, how do I structure this in the right way?
Yeah, so absolutely. It's your money at the end of the day, and it's going to fund your future retirement. So getting control of that early on is really important. And that's most people's first sort of views on investing as well. It's when they first notice it as well, because they're enrolled in it or they set one up. So.
Absolutely. And if we want to retire and have this fantastic retirement, we definitely need to get set up for it in the right way. Victoria, if I can ask you how you started your investment journey.
Mine was very much through my sorry, I think my connection's dropping out. Is that all right? Can you hear me okay? Oh, good. Through my job, I started actually on reception of the Lincoln office of Brewin Dolphin, in fact, at 18, and just loved it. I thought it was, you know, I loved being the first point of contact for clients, but I just thought the stock market and, you know, how different assets moved, and I just thought it was absolutely fascinating. So mine was, you know, I set up my own little personal account at work and did some trading there. So that was the beginning of my journey.
It's being inquisitive, isn't it? And curiosity.
Yeah.
I think that's what it is as well, that can make it quite interesting and exciting. And also then you have that control. And once you have that control, you want to carry on. Felicia.
Yeah, I mean, I also started quite late, as in, again, because of the job that I was in. I did an internship with Bailey Gifford before I started working for them, actually, and as in full time. And yeah, I started looking, I mean, because to be honest, before, I never thought I'd go into finance. I always thought like, oh God, that's boring. And so I wasn't really, and I wasn't taught in school about investing, and I've gone to school in a few different places and nowhere in different countries, nowhere was I taught about investing. And I think that's also really quite something that we need to change. But had I known more about how it works and what it is, I think I would have gotten interested sooner. But because I think I was around 24 when I first started, and that's not, it's better to start late than never. But because of how compounding without getting boring, bogged down into boring concepts, but compounding essentially is just interest on interest, and the key component of that is time. And so the sooner you start, it's better that you start with very, very little, and you at least start and you continue doing it, because even the impact if you wait 10 years has a massive impact on the overall returns in the long run. And so it's just, I think I wish I'd started sooner. And the reason I started was because I became familiar with it because of my job. So yeah, I think maybe because all of us work in the industry, that's how it seems like we all got in touch with that. But it's really interesting to have people who don't work in the industry, how they find out. And sometimes it is because they hear of someone else doing it, or sometimes it is because they have an interest in the stock market already. Yeah.
And I think, as you said before, people see something exciting going on and they think, how can I get involved? What do I need to do that? And even if it's something small, like you said, put aside a little bit a month. There are products available now where you could put aside £20, £50, as little as that, just to start that journey. Brilliant. Thank you, ladies. Another question that we've got is, so it's back to risk again. I wanted to ask a question about risk. Ideally, should one diversify themselves and invest in a bit of everything? Home owning schemes, pensions, stocks, insurance. You touched on it, Felicia. I guess yes, but also having to look at that portfolio that you're building and diversify given different factors, whether it's time, whether it's geography, whether it's product type. Who would want to take that one?
Yeah, I'll happily answer that. I think, again, it ties in with what you're trying to achieve. So if you are looking at individual investments, then yes, of course, it's important to diversify within those investments. So within a pension plan or within your investments, for example, but also time horizon is a key point. So for example, if you were going to buy a property in 2 years' time, you wouldn't invest in such a short time horizon. So you'd have a pot that you would put regular cash savings in, and therefore you're diversifying across assets as well, making sure you've got your cash for your property, your investments for a medium term, and then also your pension pot as well for retirement.
Great, thank you, Vivienne. We've got lots of questions, I have to say. I think you've provoked a lot of discussion. So one of the other ones is around personal investing. So what platform or platforms would you recommend using to facilitate personal investing? Would it be better to start an account with a big investment bank or use a popular retail investing platform such as Robinhood or Moneybox? Obviously, just opinion. Victoria, go ahead.
It is just opinion. And I have to say, if you're starting out, from the very beginning, I do think the robo advice services are amazing, because you do your questionnaire of what you want to achieve and your risk level, and it will pop out with an automatically diversified portfolio. If you're the one in control, are you going to pick the best fund for your needs? And so I do think they're a really good solution. I actually have a Life ISA with Moneybox, which I love, and it's a user-friendly app, and you can round up your spending, so you can make really small contributions, but equally WealthiFi, Nutmeg, they're all really good and user-friendly.
Great, some great advice there, thank you. And actually, this is an interesting...
So I was going to say, can I just add to that, on the robo-advisors, because I completely agree, start with someone who's already kind of made the decisions for you in that sense. And the only thing I would say with the robo-advice, I think that's a great plan if you want to go that route and make it more based on kind of a specific risk profile. But if you want something even simpler than that and even cheaper than that, I think no one really beats Vanguard in terms of what they do. If what you want is exposure to stock markets and in a simple way, and you want exposure to broad kind of stock markets and that, so indices, where you have a collection of all companies depending on the country or the sector and so on, I think they have a really great platform, which fair enough only has their own products, but it is some of the cheapest in the markets, and you literally just buy the market. So if that is a first step, because that is cheaper than the robo-advisors by quite some way actually. So if you want to really minimize costs and just want exposure to the stock market, I think there is few things that can rival what they do. And I mean, I say that as they are one of our competitors. So it's one of those, it's just, there's all kinds of different things, but yeah, no, robo-advisors or just buying an index fund on a very, very cheap platform.
Yeah.
You know, this is the beauty of these discussions, is that you are giving, you're letting them know what's available, you know, whether it is a competitor to you or not, you're letting them know all that's available and what's suitable for them, which is what is needed. So we've got quite a few questions around, so first time investing. So Janice says, I'm a student with quite a small budget. Are there any advice on what kind of investments that she could start with? And similarly, having another attendee has said, having never invested before, what is the minimum amount that I can start to invest with? Who would like to take that one? Vivian?
With regards to the minimum amounts, it just depends on where you're going to invest. Each provider will state their minimum amount, so it's just about doing those researches. You know, probably a lump sum between £100 to £500, and then a regular amount, or a larger lump sum for no amount. So it's just working out what provider is best for you. And in regards to what would be the best things to invest in as a first-time investor, what Victoria was saying about a ready-made portfolio, it's already diversified within that. That's probably you know, the best way forward, just because you don't have to start thinking about it, unless you are interested in buying individual shares. But you know, that's something that's a personal decision, and then that's going to be increasing the risk. It's finding what works best for you.
And also, so things like ISAs, for example, they could possibly be a good way to start, because you can not only invest your cash, but you could start to, and you can put little bits away, and then you could also look at the stocks and shares ISA. So you could also put a proportion of your money into that. And as a one of the late, so Ashna said, thank you for the session in my second year of uni, and after the talk today, she feels like she should be starting early. Is this the right age, and what should the first step be? So yeah. Would ISAs be a good idea? Victoria, go ahead. I know you're eager to
because now is the right age, you know, just but equally don't stress if you're struggling to keep your head above water. You know, don't panic that it has to be done yesterday. The sooner you start, the better, but don't worry too much. And I did just hop on my little Moneybox app actually, and it says you can start your ISA with as little as £1.
Amazing. What is the Moneybox app? Is that a good tool to use?
I enjoy it. It is you know, ready-made portfolio. It's quite cheap, but as Felicia said, you know, there are cheaper options. But I like the usability, and yeah, you can have your
So the various options like that you can that can help you to budget, that can help you to think about what you could invest in. Okay, brilliant.
If I can just give a shout out as well, because there's become the whole robo-advice space has grown quite a lot over the last years. So there's now all different kinds. So Moneybox is, I think, one of the more famous ones, and Nutmeg as well, which are great in different ways. But also, and then I mentioned Vanguard if you just want to get access to the markets. But then if you're interested in, because I know sustainable investing is something that we talked about before as well. And actually, before I get into that, the whole how little you need, I think it's fairly common on most of these platforms, including our own, which is a DIY platform. You can start with £1 because there's so much technology that supports that at the moment for investors, that you don't need to start with a lot. And you'll find a stocks and shares ISA on pretty much all of those platforms. So make use of those. I really can't stress that enough, because all of the tax benefits that come with that. So if you are in a lucky position of having more than 20 grand in a year to invest, great, then you look at other things. But I generally think that, you know, start with an ISA and make the most of that. But just on the sustainable ones, there's Moneybox and Nutmeg and those people, but then there's companies like Ticker, which maybe some people have heard about, which is like a robo-advisor, but focused on sustainable options. So again, they invest the portfolios for you, but you can fit into what you're kind of interested in. You got Climate, which is another sustainable one there. There's a few different options that kind of specialize as well, if you don't want to go the whole hog with a DIY platform, in which case you have the bigger names that you may have heard of, Hargreaves Lansdown, Charles Stanley, AJBL, all of those, and they all work slightly differently, and what we do is slightly different as well, but it's a different approach. And I think so if you're just starting out, having a look at the different robos is a good shout, but there are quite a lot of differentiation within them as well, so that's definitely worth having a look at, I think.
And again, specifically on ISAs, there's a question. Would those advisors be able to help you around where they can access or learn more about an ISA, or are there any additional resources that can help that?
As in, sorry, with those platforms?
With either those platforms or any other resources that can really help you to identify between, because there is a world of ISAs out there. So just to help you differentiate between them.
Yeah, I mean, I can just speak for kind of what we do, and so, and I think for most platforms you will find information around what is a stocks and shares ISA and what are the rules around them and why it might be suitable for you. There's obviously a range of other ISAs, as you mentioned, but in terms of investing, that is usually that if you want to invest in stock markets, I think that's the primary one to perhaps look at, but there's other ISAs with different benefits that are for different purposes. But you will find information about what stocks and shares ISAs are and how they work on every single platform now, I think. And even if you just Google it, you'll find that pretty quickly, I think.
Yeah. Victoria.
And also to compare ISAs, money saving experts are always very good. And there's a website called money.co.uk, which if you scroll down the page has a load of different guides on, you know, jargon, investing, ISAs and things. And that's a really great source as well.
Brilliant, thank you. The other thing actually that was linked to, you'd mentioned before about using robo-advisors, because sometimes it can be high transactional fees if you're going to traditional other means. Should young people and first-time starters consider banks and retail, which are more secure, but known to have sometimes quite high transaction fees?
Can I just take that first? Because in terms of the assumption that they are more secure, I don't know what that, I think there is an assumption in because the name has been around for longer, they're more secure. But when it comes to, sorry?
Demystify us.
Yeah, and I think it's that thing around so we're a regulated financial platform, and to be an investment platform, you have to you have to have certain regulatory permissions, will be tied to, in some way you are regulated by the FCA. And the money that is invested through these platforms are covered, they're not typically held, they're not tied into the money that is the kind of the corporate well-being of that company. It is held elsewhere and it's protected, and you have the FSCS protection and so on. There's all kinds of different things that protect your money, that is ring fencing it away from the success of the individual company. And at the end of the day, the investment, that's your money. And especially when at the end of the day, the nominee, the owner of that is yours. So a company can't claim that as theirs. And therefore that doesn't necessarily mean that it's less safe because they're already regulated. However, I guess there's things around, if it's a younger company, you don't know if it's necessarily as likely to be there in the future. So then you might have to transfer your money elsewhere, but it's kind of separated from the actual investments that you have. And I think that's just important to say, that just because they're young and so on, as long as they're regulated, make sure they are, then your money is safe in that sense, or it should be safe in that sense.
And that's a key point. Whoever you're looking at, you can, and it's very available to make sure that you can see that they're regulated organizations. And if you're in the UK, here in the UK or wherever you're based, to just make sure that you check that. I have got a couple more questions, and actually this comes down to, and this is always in my past a thing that we used to talk a lot about, is not timing the market and just being invested and starting out. Because one of the questions is, what are your thoughts on the current economic environment, and is it a good time to invest now? Who would like to take that one? Victoria's smiling.
Yeah. Happy to.
And then we'll move on to Vivienne.
Full of opinions. What do I think of the current market environment? Difficult. I think if anyone's been watching, the market's actually down 2% today. I think that we've come through, the pandemic. On the whole, the economy and global economies have been projected to bounce back really quickly, and government support has helped that, which has been incredible. I think that it's probably not clear sailing from here, and that there will be bumps in the road with different variants and things. There will always be things happening in the wider world that you cannot predict, and that you you can't see into the future. So, you know, with a well-diversified portfolio of different countries, of different asset classes, you can sort of try and smooth out those bumps. I remember a client had a lot of their pension in BP, who, you know, with the Macdonald oil spill, the share price, you know, more than halved, and that's the importance of diversification. So I think economies look good. I think the UK looks great, especially for inward investment as well. We saw Nissan commit to investing £1 billion in a new factory here, which is great and all very positive. But you know, nothing goes up in a straight line.
No, absolutely, and good comments actually. And you actually have to always look at your own positioning and your own fundamentals and work that way, as opposed to trying to pick up on those small opportunities. Vivian.
Yeah, I completely agree with Victoria. I mean, if you are worried about investing into the markets, you know, why is that? Is that because you need the funds in the next few years, or are you looking to invest for a longer time? These little dips in the market, they do, you know, you'd hope that they would smooth out over the longer time horizon. So yes, for us, you know, in March when the markets dropped, everyone was a bit, you know, panicky, but as long as you hold your nerve, markets did recover. So it's all about that behavioural side and not worrying when your investments do go down, because there will be a time that they do go down. And it's also important to not be reliant on those funds, which is everything we've sort of spoken about, and having separate pots, is that when markets go down, you're comfortable with that because you know you've got the time horizon to weather any storms and that, you know, the ups and downs in the market.
Really great points. Thank you, Vivian.
Can I just add one thing? Because I know Vivian said this earlier, but because I completely agree with both of those things as well, or what both of you said. But it's the regular investing point. Because instead of trying to find, oh, is it going to go up? Is it going to go? Just do it regularly, and that kind of removes that thought process. I mean, even professional investors really struggle to time the market, because you kind of can't, and you can only, with the benefit of hindsight, oh, I should have done, oh, I could have done. It's completely pointless. And so instead, I think starting small and doing the regular investing, as Vivian talked about, that removes that element, and over time it smooths us out as well. So yeah, I think we all have enough troubles and worries and things to think about than to try and also time the stock market is a big ask.
So basically, no shoulda, woulda, coulda, and we will just be regular saving, regular investing. That's how we work. Fantastic. Thank you, ladies. So for the final question that we've got from the audience, it's a bit of a personal one. Looking back on your own investing journeys, what, if anything, would you do slightly differently? Oh, I can see the thoughts going.
I think I know what mine is. So it's investing in property rather than stocks and shares. I bought a flat in London that has cladding problems, which is just hell. So I think perhaps I wouldn't have bought a property in this block. Had a bit, again, shoulda, woulda, coulda, had I known, you know, here with that.
Thankfully, you've enjoyed it for a while, but yes, I can understand the extra troubles. Ladies?
I think from my side, it's just a smaller regular amount to start investing. When I was younger, I thought, well, I can't invest if I haven't got thousands of pounds, and therefore I just didn't even start. Whereas obviously in hindsight now, if I just did £20-25 a month, back in the day, I'd be in a much better position now.
Absolutely. And I share that sentiment, and I actually studied finance and I was in finance, but you just don't put any onus on your personal investments, and it's typical of a lot of people, men and women actually. So yeah, definitely got to start thinking about it early. Felicia, do you have anything to add about your own personal journey?
I mean, I've always, in my personal kind of savings, in terms of the long-term kind of the pension and so on, I've always taken a lot of risk in that, and I personally don't regret that. But the few times when I have bought something because one of my friends bought it and didn't do my own homework, and then it's usually, I mean, it's pretty much 100% not worked out because I didn't know what I was doing. And I think that's the thing around, even when you're in, because it's so easy to like, you know, this is really cool, or I really believe this is going to happen. And it's not just, you know, the sexy stocks, but it's also like, this is really undervalued, really bombed out, and it's actually going to recover. I just never did. And it's not that they necessarily kind of, that I don't rate their research or so on, but I think it's the case, I just did it on the back of that rather than thinking a bit for myself. And so, yeah, those times when I've done that, I wish I hadn't done that perhaps. And I guess it just comes down to engaging with the decisions you make, whether they are stock specific or fund level. Know what you own. And most people don't even know where their pension is, as we talked about earlier, and never mind what it's invested in. And a lot of providers do a terrible job of telling you as well. So, but there's a lot of, talking about fintech earlier, there's a lot of really cool companies trying to break that down and make it much more free and accessible. So as in free in terms of freedom of moving your pensions around and so on. So yeah, bring that on, because that is definitely a long time coming, I think. So yeah.
Absolutely. And yeah, some good learnings there, Felicia. But to your point in the beginning, the onus is on us to understand and to get to know. Abiola's asked, what are the different categories of assets? This might be a bigger one to be able to tackle today, but where can they get access to this? So the question is, what are all the different categories of assets to invest in, from highest to lowest risk versus reward? Where would, and obviously there is a large spectrum going from very illiquid to liquid, but where would be the best resource to be able to get access to that information readily?
I'm happy to just start on resource. I think the asset classes, even there are some generalizations perhaps to be made, but even within those asset classes, you can find really kind of plodding along equities and really risky bonds. And it's not all that all bonds are safe and all equities are risky and all that stuff. So it's actually quite a complex discussion, and certainly would require longer to dig into, but a great question. And I think so. For instance, on our site, we have a lot of content, a lot of articles that we try and keep short. And one of those is an introduction to asset classes, and then kind of digging deeper into them as well. But I think, yeah, the first thing is to try and understand what they are about and whether they are suitable for you. But yeah, reading around about them, I think, again, it's a case of there is information out there. It's not that it doesn't exist, but sometimes it's hard to wade through all of the jargon and all of that stuff. And that is something that I know a lot of people try to do better, and we are one of those as well, but I'm sure there's plenty of information elsewhere on that as well.
And also talking to an advisor. There are a lot of advisors that will spend half an hour speaking to you without you having to commit to anything to talk through some of these things. So Vivian, for example, or other advisors can talk to you around those basic, just to give you a broad understanding, and then then you can take that further. Ladies, thank you to the audience for amazing questions. They were really, really good, and they tackled a lot of the subjects that I know a lot of people are wanting to know a little bit more about. I have one last question that I would like to put to the three of you. Less of a question, more of a takeaway. So some action orientated. Do you mind giving 3 steps to the audience, 2 or 3 steps to the audience on where you think they should get started on this journey, and if you have any, you've given a lot of resources, I have to say, already, which is great, but any other resources available to them? So if I'll start with Victoria.
I think a useful first step would be the online risk questionnaires that I'd mentioned. Just Google attitude to risk questionnaire, and then those robo advice apps that we'd talked about, so that you can get started with relatively small sums. As your portfolios grow and you invest more, then you can start to think about hiring somebody like me or Vivian, or to look after your money. So yeah,
thank you,
that's
Victoria.
probably it.
Excellent, thank you. Vivian.
Yeah, I would say do your own research and make sure you're comfortable with whatever way or wherever you want to invest, whatever you decide. Doing a budget and making sure you can afford to invest, and all those little building blocks towards investing. And then put a plan in place, set your objectives. What would you like to achieve? Think about the time horizons and go from there.
Brilliant. Very good practical advice. Thank you both. And Felicia.
Well, I think that is great advice already. I think maybe also reiterating a few things that we already talked about. The first thing for me is just talk about it, start talking about it, because if you don't do that, it's really kind of hard to move forward. So that's the first thing I would say. Talk to everyone and anyone. And if they don't want to talk to you about it, I'm sure they'll tell you. So I would just assume everybody wants to talk about it, and then you'll find the right people for you. And then the second one is do your homework in terms of learn about this, so resources. And I think before you actually start doing something, being a bit comfortable with the basics around it. And so there's plenty of resources out there. I think there's a few things. So of course I'm going to mention what we do because we're big on content. So we have around 40 insight articles on all kinds of different aspects of investing, from the basics down to deep dives in sustainable investing. And we also have these jargon flashcards. They're essentially like a flashcards, and you find all kinds of jargon that you'll come across in the industry and what that means. But beyond what we do, there's a great app that I would like to give a shout out to that's called Finimize. I don't know if any of you have used it or heard of it. Finimize with a Z, and they are content driven about investing, and you can learn about everything and everything from short blurbs to really deep dives and into from the broad to the niche. And they have both a free tier and a paid tier, and they do really cool interviews and articles and so on. And so I'd recommend them. And actually about 40% of their users are women. So that's also really cool. And then the third one I wanted to give a shout out to is Boring Money, who do great content on all kinds of basics around investing. They do great league tables where they compare platforms for fees. They do their own kind of model portfolios on these platforms to see how they actually perform. And the woman who runs it also, I think personally, has a really great tone of voice, very kind of human in that sense. So I'd recommend kind of that, but familiarize yourself. And then the third kind of tip is it's actually just to get started. Once you have done what Vivian said and what Victoria said, in that sense of you're comfortable, you know that you can afford it, and even you start small, and maybe you do it with a group of friends. Like maybe you know, if you've gone play poker and everybody puts in 20 quid, you do the same, and you have something to like real to discuss, and you can challenge each other, you can bring ideas, you kind of buy in literally. And I think that is the first step of being comfortable with investing. And as Vivian said it before, you know, if something drops 20%, how are you going to feel? And then you have a test case of that with a lot less money. And because trust me, you feel kind of similar, whether it's a lot of money or a little money. It's the feeling of, oh my God, it's like 30%. So I think the sooner you kind of get comfortable with that and doing it in a group together, I would recommend.
These are all really fabulous tips, and it's clear it's about your relationship with money. It's getting comfortable and building your own personal relationship with your own money. I think it's clear that financial autonomy is key to giving greater control. It gives us options. It gives us freedom of choice to make choices. As I mentioned earlier on, it's clear that there is a link between self-esteem, financial autonomy, financial confidence. And I think with increased financial autonomy, we have a positive effect. In short, the case for well-being is essentially the case for your overall well-being. The case for financial well-being is the case for your overall well-being. I think we should see money management as self-care. Just as we make sure we're physically fit and we go to the gym, we make sure we're mentally fit and we have mindfulness techniques. Let's also focus on our financial fitness. I hope that you all can see from today that investing is not scary. At least it doesn't have to be, especially when you've got wonderful women like this at your disposal, available to help you. There is advice available and financial information platforms available as well. And if you want to retire someday, it's essential. So it's been absolutely wonderful to have all three of you here today. It's been a pleasure to join you, and it's been a pleasure to welcome you, the audience. Thank you so much. Do feel free to connect. Email addresses are in the chat box, so thank you. I also want to say a special thanks to Vicky and to Gain for putting this together. It's really important that we have more and more of these, so thank you again, and a pleasure. And with that, I will wish you a wonderful afternoon, and look forward to seeing you all and hearing from you all soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.